Hey, hello. My name is Jay Gordon. Welcome back to this week's, or I should say this month's, um, Azure Cosmos DB Global User Group. I'm really glad to be here with you. I've got a great guest. And before I get to my guest, though, I've got a bunch of information that I want to share with you all as we get started. All right. So I want to remind you all, as always, that we are governed in this session by the Microsoft Code of Conduct. And the Code of Conduct specifically asks you to respect everyone's um, opinions, respect their who they are, what they are. The overall, like Bill and Ted said, be excellent to each other. So if you're in the comments, if you're sharing something, let's just make sure that we're sharing positive and interesting information. So if you have any questions about the code of conduct, you can send me a message in comments, or you can go ahead and go to aka.ms/code of conduct. Um, Also, want to remind you that we like to do a giveaway during our show. I want you to make sure that you are part of that giveaway. We want to give you a little something cool. So if you tag any of your comments that you send today to with hashtag Azure Cosmos DB, we're going to have or I should say hashtag Cosmos DB. We will be having a giveaway. You'll get some free Azure Cosmos DB swag. I think that's a really cool thing for you to be part of. So make sure, and more than anything, I want you to get something really useful out of this session. I want you to learn. I want you to be part of this community. So make sure you tell people about everything that's associated with this session. Give them their links, and we'll make sure that as far as links are concerned as well, you'll get a bunch of information. And so today, our guest has so much great information to share with us. I'm going to bring him in right now. Steef-Jan Wiggers, how are you from the Netherlands? How are you today?
Hi, Jay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really good. I'm in the Netherlands. It's Liberation Day today, so we're celebrating that. During World War II, the 5th of May, we were liberated. The treaty, or at least when they surrendered, that was done in Wageningen. So that's a Hotel Wageningen. So if you're familiar in history, that's about, I would say, a couple of miles from here. So my kids will be celebrating Liberation Day today because there's a lot of festivities going. I will be first, of course, doing a talk to you guys. So that's the first thing I will do. And
Well,
yeah,
thank
looking
you.
forward to it.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing this day with us. I really do appreciate it. So we've got some interesting things to talk about today, but before we get into that, I wanted to give you a chance just to give everybody a brief introduction to yourself and let us know what you've done, what you're doing, and what you're working on lately.
Well, I work in the Azure space for quite a long time and do some integration predominantly. So over the 20 years, starting at KLM, doing some integration with mainframe systems back in the day. And then we had the .conf era, connecting to databases, client server, and then slowly progressed into enterprise integration, which I've been doing for quite a bit now, I would say. These days, it's a lot of integration with Dynamics 365, so it's where companies are taking their journey from having on-premise box systems, could be Dynamics AX, but could also be another product, and migrating at least that part of their IT into the cloud, which means that some of the other tech is going to be shifted along the way as well if you're also connecting to other systems supporting those business processes like SaaS solutions and so forth. So, and you will see that in this presentation as well. So,
Well, I have here your Twitter account up for our viewers to take a look at if they want to be able to find out all this kind of really cool information. And the one thing that I really love that you've got on your profile, which I think you and I share some similar interest in, is metal music. I see you're wearing an Enslaved T-shirt. I'm wearing a Kowloon Walled City T-shirt today. I'm very, very envious of people out in the portion of Europe you are. You get a lot of bands that come in and out. You get to see a lot of great music. I know that the pandemic kind of probably slowed that down, but I was actually just in London like last weekend, and that music scene is still very vibrant. Lots and lots going on.
True.
So we've got a lot going on right now in this
Yeah.
session. I want to give you a chance to just take a look at your camera. It's a little blurry right now. You may need to just kind of have it readjust. But other than that, I think you're ready to go.
I think so too. Yeah, I think everything is technically set on my end. So
Okay, so I am going to take a back seat. I'm going to give you
yeah,
the opportunity to start presenting. I'm going to bring up your screen now, and then you can go ahead and start your presentation. Sound good?
sound good to me. Let's go.
Thanks.
Okay. So if I'm correct, you'll see that I will be talking about leveraging Cosmos DB for monitoring your Azure integration solutions. So I already did a bit of an introduction myself. As in the Twitter profile, I like, of course, metal music. The other stuff I like, I really like to do sports and all kinds of sports, hockey, field hockey in this, and not ice hockey. I'm not so good at skating, although you might think if you're living in the Netherlands that you could at least skate. I can ride a bike, so that's not a problem. The other thing I really like to do is running marathons. So that's why you see that in the picture. I recently, a couple of weeks ago, was in Boston. So that was during Patriots Day. And that's where I did my final Abbott Big Six marathon. So this Big Six means that there's marathons, one in Tokyo, one and two in Europe. That's Berlin and London, where you just recently been, Jay, London. And there's three in the US. So that's Chicago, New York, and Boston. So Boston was a pretty interesting one. It was kind of a tough one. Especially after 30K, you're going up to a hill which is called Heartbreak Hill. And although it didn't break my heart, but I did slow down a bit. But ultimately, as you can see, the result is that I was able to finish it. So I see that as a big accomplishment. Okay, besides sports and music, like to travel, I work at HSO. That's an ISV in the Netherlands. It's actually based a couple of miles from here, in Veenendaal. Where I do integration with Dynamics 365 predominantly. So that's kind of a big ERP system comparable to what you would say SAP in the early days. SAP still exists, but for ERP systems, you see a lot of enterprises moving towards using the product from Microsoft in the cloud for ERP. So that's financials, operational data, that kind of stuff. Besides that, I'm an Azure MVP for quite a couple of years, I think over a decade now. Started at BizTalk MVP, then slowly transgressed into being an Azure MVP. And along the way, last, I would say 8-9 years, I've been doing quite some Azure projects, as you'll see in this session as well. The other thing I do is I write for InfoQ. Besides blogging, InfoQ is a worldwide website that targets developers prominently. It looks at architecture, different programming languages, but also it looks at the cloud and DevOps. And cloud, it looks predominantly to some of the big cloud providers, which is Azure and Google and AWS. I do some organizing for the Azure User Group in the Netherlands called the Windows Azure User Group NL. So that's kind of our user group. We have to start it up again since the pandemic. Some of the restrictions are kind of starting to wane off. And the other thing I do is I'm a co-organizer of Azure Lowlands. So that's kind of a targeted conference one day for the Netherlands, Belgium, and surrounding countries where we also dive into Azure. Okay, so you have a little bit of background of me, what I do. And my goal today is kind of talk about Cosmos DB and then for monitoring purposes. And I'll get to it why I think it's a good solution for monitoring. And I'll share my experience with that database service as well. Kind of hope that this will be kind of an entertaining story. I'll start off with how I got familiar with Cosmos DB before I got kind of the insights that I thought, this database service can be also awesome to use for monitoring purposes. So I'll talk about that stuff as well. So my first encounter of Cosmos DB. So there's always been built and other types of conferences, and this was kind of announced kind of back in 2017 when I was working for a customer called Read Business. So that's part of the Elsevier group, or Relics group, I believe, if you know. And we were modeling kind of a solution, and we're looking at how can we have content, relational content, how we tie them better together, or at least aggregate some of the content around text laws, and I'll dive into that in a second, together. And one of the fellow architects kind of looked at, maybe we can use a graph model, but the graph model was kind of present in some of the services you might know or capability called Neo4j. So that's kind of familiar one, but that wasn't available as a platform as a service. Luckily, when this was being launched, they did support the graph model, so that was kind of cool. There are other cloud providers that have the graph service as well, either in an IS type of solution, so it's hosted inside a virtual machine, or like AWS has a service similar to Cosmos DB, and only supporting the graph model. And in the graph model, if you like to know, it's kind of where you have edges and vertices. That's kind of, you have your objects that tie to other objects, as you can see in this picture. And it's tech that's also, or at least that type of model is something you find on the LinkedIn as well, or Netflix, because one of the benefits of using a graph model that also can provide you with recommendations. So if you look at Netflix, you look at a certain type of movies which you like, or at least it deducts the facts that you like the types of movie, then it starts to provide you recommendations. If you start browsing and scrolling around in what the offering is at Netflix, and then you see, kind of thumbs up and percentages, how close this is towards what you usually have been watching. Similarly, you would have that type of tag also in LinkedIn or in Facebook. So this is also under the hood. It uses the graph type of model as well. So my first use case, or at least first use case when I started to get familiar with Cosmos DB. So we're at that time working at a text return platform. So this particular customer was offering a platform for text return, and supporting that text return platform was a knowledge base, all about tax laws, being extra garnished with comments, jurisprudence, like a lot of information about how you could apply these particular tax laws. Of course, you have to pay taxes. If it's yourself as an individual or companies, we all got to have back taxes. But there's certain rules attached to paying taxes, and sometimes applying some of the rules can mean that you even get returns. They had an old knowledge-based type of implementation, which was on a virtual machine with Solar. But they kind of struggled with how can we tie some of these content together. So you got the text law itself, but you got some leading and other types of comments. You get some jurisprudence. So they got all kinds of content types around the text laws, how to interpret them, at least as an end user, and how to apply that when you use the other part of their platform to do your tax returns. Or you do it individually, locally at home. You can either use an almanac, or you can use this knowledge page, which was something that people could and companies could subscribe to. So there's a subscription model behind this knowledge base. But it kind of was older. They kind of didn't really like the experience. So they were looking for more for a future-proof knowledge-based type of solution. So migrating their current solution with just a website and some backend service, IS services with Solar on it, to something completely more platform as a service, which is the capabilities that Azure offers. The other thing is that they kind of want to divert from hosting parties and getting more into an Azure platform where they can leverage more the pay-as-you-go model and only pay what you consume. That said, so some of the functional components was that the tax laws were coming in through a content management system. They're partially also enriched by comments, either leading comments or more in-depth comments around the tax laws. Jurisprudence, everything was being added in at CMS before it went to what's called content constitution, where it's being ingested in kind of an engine where it's standardized, enriched metadata, even applying the metadata with kind of hierarchies, etc., before you push it into the knowledge base where it's being stored and where also the relations are, where it's being indexed and made searchable, and where you have all kinds of models of that type of data. This was functionally our starting point. So looking at more at the tech, how could we potentially solve this is like using some of the Azure components, web jobs, hosted in the app service that kind of did this, mix and matching, adding the metadata and so forth before loading it into a graph database regarding the content types, and the content itself was being stored in a document store. So basically, as full JSON documents with text and everything, and then the particular metadata and such, and the relation between the content types was being pushed into the graph using the Gremlin language. Then the content itself was being indexed because Cosmos DB from the get-go had this integration already with Azure Search. So you could make your content searchable by leveraging Azure Search and tie that into Cosmos DB, setting up a schema, and etc. That would generate some of the endpoints, including some of the APIs we built, and which were hosted inside web apps. And then this would be kind of our content API that would talk to the front end, which was hosting that type of knowledge base where users could log in, type in search queries and so forth, and get the information out that would help them fill in the text forms either on the other platform or just under home using the paperwork and such. So kind of the end solution back in the day, we had to provide kind of a proof of architecture. What are the components we're going to use? What is going to be the total cost of ownership? How's this tech going to work? Can you get a subset of the data into Cosmos DB? Can you put it into the graph as well? Can you show, so this is kind of a complete concept of this type of solution. Can we make it searchable, and can we just put a simple front end in front of it so we can get this information out to our end customers? So this is how it looks. So the CMS system was something they already bought. So this is where the content would come in. And then it was being pushed by either web jobs or .NET components that would partially do that ingestion into that graph model and also into the just plain document model we were using. The document model was being indexed, and then you generate basically API endpoints, and a custom endpoint was being created that did some traversal. That's kind of the language, the Gremlin language, on top of the graph model. So we had related content and content. So the content itself was in that Cosmos DB database, and the relation between all these content types was stored in a graph model, so set up that way. APIs, and then you had this in the front end. So if you're kind of wondering how this would work, is that someone would log into the front end, we'll have this menu bar with all kinds of steps, leveraging the knowledge base itself. But one would be like search. Okay, if I want to know around dividend tax, I would punch that in. Then it would straight away be a call towards the content that's being indexed and would show pretty quickly. So pretty quickly, because the indexing was predominantly on the text laws itself, because that was the dominant type of content. But there are some related content around it. So it could be jurisprudence, this could be some leading or in-depth comments. And while that one request was already sent out, an additional request was sent out to the related content API that did kind of the traversal inside the graph model to find the related content types and present those well as links. And then you have a richer kind of search capability where you could see, okay, this is the content. What I want to know more about these tax laws around dividend tax, etc., etc. This kind of gave the end user a more richer experience to dive into really about dividend tax. In this case, would be other type of tax information that the person needs for his tax returns. The result ultimately was that this particular customer, and this was a use case in the end, I worked together with Microsoft to get this going. I think currently it's not available on the website anymore, otherwise I would have presented the URL. But it kind of really helped this particular customer to work with this kind of tech, knowing, okay, if I use a graph, if I use search, then I have all kinds of content types like listed here, tax laws, news, etc., and give a richer experience to the end customer using the platform. So against our experience, once we were thinking about this graph model and stuff, we did reach out to Microsoft. Initially, I went to Rima Neme, and then she pointed me out to Danny Lee, who used to be one of the program managers working for the Cosmos DB group. I think he's moved on to Databricks. But he really helped me out in setting up the hierarchy, the graph model, thinking that this proof of architecture through. This could be feasible in the end to be a live solution for the complete knowledge base. So initially, he helped us out getting all the way up towards that proof of architecture point. And with these learnings, I was looking at the service itself and used some of that tech, or at least the insights, for some of my own presentations and demos. So you see depicted here that I was able to call out an open exchange rate API. So I just used the free one, which just gives me all the exchange rates back compared to the US dollar. So I was pulling that in. I was doing conversion because I thought, I also see if the functions and logic could really work together. So the epoch value gets into a datetime that's being pushed towards a queue. and then pulled by another logic app that would push that into a Cosmos DB document store. I still have this one running for a couple of years now. Sometimes in my presentations or my teaching, I'm kind of use this particular demo. What I found interesting is when I was working with this tech and when I was doing some of my experimentation, it was really helpful in building a solution for monitoring. Because my second experience, where at least my second project would say, where I also leveraged Cosmos DB, was for a Whole Foods distributor. So it was distributing Whole Foods towards the Netherlands and Belgium, where I reside. And this particular customer was already on this digital journey. At least they had a lot of tech on-prem. They even had their ERP system on-prem, which I believe was Unit 4, another type of proprietary product. And I kind of wanted to do this digitalization, say, okay, now we want to move some of our assets, in this case, our financial asset, that type of software, into the cloud. And they chose to migrate towards Dynamics 365. That meant that, having this particular asset in the cloud as a SaaS solution type of thing, then some of the data needs to go into the SaaS solution as well. And this is what you see depicted in the picture. So some of the warehouse management systems, some of their financial data and operational data needs to be pushed inside Dynamics to get a holistic view of their financials in their company. So a lot of that data was being pushed towards what's called a BizTalk server. So that's the predecessor of the Azure integration services that you might be familiar with, which are Logic App Functions, the messaging part with Service Bus and Event Grid. So kind of what we did here was BizTalk server was not able to then communicate directly with Dynamics 365 because of the lack of the security mechanism. It didn't really support the OAuth 2.0 tech to do this kind of connectivity. The other thing is didn't want to directly connect from the on-prem towards Dynamics. We kind of wanted to have this facade kind of layer in front of it with a Logic App. So the Logic App would ultimately receive the information that's being pushed towards what's called recurring jobs. That's the part of the data management framework inside Dynamics to insert that data or the journaling inside of Dynamics itself. So that's what you see. That's what the one Logic App would do. Then when a job was being kicked off, at least when you say, okay, here's your journaling, you would get an identifier back, which would then be pushed to another Logic App, which would just retrieve the status. Is that job finished? So it's kind of the mechanism that that's kind of in place for recurring jobs. And based on the job status, you could ultimately know if the journaling itself was succeeded or not. Now you see a lot of other arrows. And the reason you see a lot of other arrows is that the logging, so that, where the message originates from all the way in its journey towards Dynamics 365, there's being logging points. So it's kind of, okay, I've been here, that's being logged. So every stage from A to B, the BizTalk server, the posting and getting the status, all that information was being pushed towards a queue where another Logic App was being listening and pushing this into a Cosmos DB. So kind of pushing all the events, I've been here, I've been here, I've been here. And this was being indexed, creating some of those endpoints. So this is what I, gained from the learnings from my previous experience, making it searchable for the operational part. So they can see, okay, my messages are flowing from A to B and it's going okay. Additionally, we're also storing original files and mapped files. So the functionality of BizTalk server in this case is only mapping the original files coming from payrolling or management system towards the expected format for those jobs in Dynamics 365. So the monitoring solution a little bit zoomed out. So you see that some of the logging is being pushed towards a Cosmos DB. That is being indexed and it generates an endpoint. There's another endpoint available in general where you could push that job ID that you have towards that endpoint saying, okay, what's the status? And there was an additional endpoint in this particular dashboard that was being created in, I think, PHP, but did host it in an app server. So it was completely Azure based, enabled to get the file, which was either the original file or the mapped file. So this was all stored in, or at least available within a custom created dashboard. And then you would wonder, okay, what would these particular logs look like? That, from the different stages from A to B, going from on-prem all the way into Dynamics 365, how would they look? So here's some custom fields being filled. Some of the data that's required, what's the actual original file name, what's my message ID. So that's kind of how you can correlate all these steps together. So you need to have some type of correlation as well in place. What's the particular status, or you would say, what's the stage where it resides? Where does it come from? Where does it go to? So all this type of information was inside these logs. So the under part is, this is actually the document inside Dynamics 3 or inside Cosmos DB itself. So that's kind of what's being logged constantly on all these stages. Then you have your dashboard. So you would wonder, okay, how does this dashboard look like? So this is where some of those backend API endpoints are stuck onto this front end, I would say. So this will enable you with the dashboard to look to some of your logging. So you can either date from day 2, so you can do some sorting. This is just a simple kind of UI allowing you to do some of the search of all the messages that were going or flowing into Dynamics 365. And if you look at a particular run, you would see some of the message details. So this is why, okay, it started at Dynamics, it started at BizTalk, so that's the bottom one. It's received by the Logic app, it's been sent to Dynamics, and then ultimately it's received by Dynamics 365. That's the job ID. And if this all goes well, then this is kind of a successful run. The details will also present if you want to look at the original import file name. So that would be meaning that you could see the original file or the import file. So this was all consolidated in a custom dashboard. What happened under the hood as well, and now it becomes a little bit more interesting, is that we were also leveraging the change feed. So there was a function behind it that was like being triggered every time a record came in. And they particularly looked at the status of the job that was being performed inside Dynamics 365. So the last log would contain the information if this particular run, the traversal of the message going from on-prem all the way into Dynamics, was successful if not. It could mean that this DMF job just failed, processed as error or error. This was possible. Then this was being pushed to a blob storage because we wanted to consolidate all these error messages inside a blob storage. And by that time, also Event Grid came in place. Event Grid is a capability inside this umbrella or portfolio of Azure integration services, allows you to centrally manage your events, meaning that the blob created event could be pushed to its subscribers. So this kind of a push-push mechanism, meaning that this blob created, meaning that it contained the information about this particular error, was being pushed towards a Logic app as a subscriber, which would get some of the logging metadata and push that information as a notification to the functional team, the team that was basically owning and operating and supporting the Dynamics 365 instance. So they were notified directly. So there was no messaging or alerting for the operational RT team. This directly straight away went to the functional team, which meant that they were getting a message, or at least an email, containing also a link which they were able to click. So if they clicked that particular link, they were able to see the information straight in their faces. Like, okay, so this is the message ID, this is kind of the flow. Okay, I understand this is the particular message going from on-prem all the way to Dynamics. That was the intention, but it failed inside Dynamics because that's kind of where the issues could potentially happen. When you do your import, there's all kinds of, there's a staging table, there's all kinds of rules going off, and there might be some information missing, which you can also see in this particular example. It could be that some information is missing. So they can click on get details. That would go again, or at least if this is empty, they can click details. This would go to the particular endpoint in Dynamics 365 to get the information based on the job ID saying, okay, hey, this is actually what is going wrong. Then they can also inspect if the in-flight information, so from the message is going to BizTalk server itself, if something wrong with that one, or the mapping. So when the message from BizTalk goes towards the Logic app is not correct. So they can click that. So they can do a full inspection of why this particular information or why this particular message failed inside Dynamics 365. What kind of was the result of this is that this provided a quick resolution of functional errors in Dynamics 365. It was kind of, hey, not just a generic message something fails, now really targeted toward Dynamics. So they could look into the error and they could say, okay, this is wrong, we can fix this, and then they can either decide to click on that particular job inside Dynamics to do a rerun of it by correcting because a dimension is failing or a company is unknown. They can do this type of fixes and then kind of resubmit or restart that particular job inside Dynamics because they kind of know which job it is. In general, it just gives them insights on all kind of their financial flows and the message flows and the data going from A to B. So it kind of gives them insight. It gives them searchability. They can find out if things are failing, or they can just find out in general if things are going. And the other thing is there's this provided for them a pretty low cost monitoring solution. So they could just leverage what's available in Azure using Cosmos DB, the integration with search, leveraging your change feed, and basically use that. And the cost of ownership, including the runs of the logic apps and everything, was around, I think, between 200 and 300 euros a month, just for this particular solution. And they were leveraging this particular solution not just for their financials, but they also leverage it for some of their other integration by using the same kind of paradigm and the way we solved it. So they could use the same dashboard, but then they would have different tabs on the left-hand side, so they can also have a look how those flows are going. So they really tremendously added value for them, building a solution for monitoring this particular flows, but some of the other flows could be set up similarly and giving them the similar insights. And also provide the availability to send the functional messages predominantly to the team that's responsible for it, so that it becomes very efficient. Learning so far. So I've seen that there's various ways to integrate with Cosmos DB, and I think that, for instance, search is a very valuable part in this particular solution for this customer. Searching, providing the index, or the indexing, providing those API endpoints that can be leveraged inside a dashboard. It can be a variable. What I've also learned, at least, is that this can be if there's no SaaS solution or other requirement to have a particular solution out of the market. So it's more like a buy versus build decision, but you want to build it yourself because it can be low cost or just better fulfills your needs. Then, for instance, Cosmos DB and its capabilities can be a useful asset. And the other thing is, what I've learned in the early stages is that they would say, oh, well, Cosmos can be expensive, but that's not, well, depending on how you would size it. In early days, there wasn't a service model, so you had to see what type of RUs you need to use and such. But going forward, there was a service model in place. In this case, depending on the workloads weren't so high, we were able to set it on the pretty low end of the request queues in this particular case. Then we move forward to the present day. So first encounter was kind of 2018. Year and a half later, I was building that solution I just previously talked about. And now we're kind of in 2021, 22, where I'm working for another customer where I brought these learnings with me towards this project. So this is about a large grocery chain in the Netherlands, but also worldwide, that wanted to modernize their messaging broker that was on-prem. So this wasn't a BizTalk, this was a proprietary one. And given the fact that I had this proven monitoring solution as well, so I wanted to bring this, and there were some additional requirements from them as well to have everything in the cloud, because we were modernizing this to the cloud. I have a picture in a minute. See how the flows are and also be able to monitor this. And they also, if able, also want to see how the movement of data was on-prem. So I'll dive into these things as well. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what we were doing. So this is the complete kind of landscape of this particular customer. You see a lot of systems. You see the enterprise service bus. You see an ERP system here as well, which is dynamic. So there's a lot of moving information going back and forth between these systems around finance, logistics, everything around, I would say, you would say this retailing, like this company, the grocery store. You could maybe compare this to Walmart, I think Target, supermarket, something like that. So their service bus needed to be modernized. It was on-prem, and they're like, we want to do a lot of lift and shifting, and we also want to modernize this particular service bus that does the communication with all these systems. But we also want to be able to see if messages from A to B, from source to target, if this goes well, and if it doesn't, if there's a functional error or something else, we want to see this. So this is my toolbox. This is a toolbox in general, so I'm just popping this up. So modernizing, meaning that I was using Azure Integration Services, and I'm kind of using this particular picture as a reference architecture where you could build your interfaces or with functions and logic apps, or if it's bulk data, you could use Azure Data Factory. You could use something with storage. Then you have your messaging, part of the messaging being the service bus, the relay, topics and subscriptions. Those are parts of the messaging inside your service bus capability. That's part of the Azure Integration Service as well. Or if you talk about eventing or events, that you can also use the event hubs. And then API itself, which can be built and hosted, like in a function, you can host as an app service. You could also leverage API management, also part of Azure Integration Services when you communicate with the outside world. And then surrounding this is your infrastructure, depending if you need some type of isolation with VNets, etc., with network security groups, subnets, etc. You have your DevOps on one side where you automate CI/CD, your integrations. You get your security with Azure Active Directory, where you have also your app registrations, for instance, what you need to create to set this trust between your components and your dynamics. And then you have a plethora of some of the services you could use for monitoring. And you won't see initially Cosmos DB listed, although it does have a purpose. So going forward, so how did we build up this particular ESB? Because there's no ESB product inside the cloud. You would kind of build this up with some of the components that you have. You could say this is kind of a microservice type of approach. You have some of your components allowing you to get your information from A to B, do some of the validation if necessary, the translations, the processing, and the delivery. And those are all stages that your message will go through in this particular concept. So a XML best message or orders could come in through a logic app, which would pick it up using an SFTP connector. It will pick it up, store it in a container, and then trigger the event trigger basically saying, hey, there's a block created, meaning that the whole flow will start. And this is kind of what I would say is a pipes and filters pattern. So you see the URL here as well. This is something I blogged about as well. So if you really want to read about this particular pattern, you can read it back, where it's being validated, translated, and it's being all the way pushed towards the delivery container, where there's another listener, a logic app that would push it, for instance, again, with an SFTP to its target system. This is a particular part of some of the information flows inside this customer, going from A to B, going from one system to the other system or multiple systems, depending on how consistent that data needs to be in all these systems. And for this, we had to set up a monitoring solution. So the monitoring some of those domains, we would say, so everything around articles, all these flows were like combined using that pattern, same for assortment, etc., etc. We were also monitoring, or we needed to monitor, or at least get this monitoring going for some of the PowerShell scripts on-prem that would move data as well. We want to consolidate that data as well as, for instance, for APIs. In the end of the day, their vision is to have something like a London Underground map, so they can completely have the holistic view of all their data flows in some type of monitoring solution. So we're still building this. What we're kind of leaning towards is using also the concept of event sourcing. So everywhere, the stages that I also presented or talked about in my previous use case is that we would just push all those messages, or at least where it came through which stage, like, okay, the validation, then you do your transformation, etc., all being pushed towards a Cosmos DB. You could see this also as a concept of event sourcing. So this is another pattern that we kind of used, in particular to build up this monitoring solution. So you would get a kind of a materialized view, which is something that you could leverage through a dashboard, like in the previous system or previous use case, or you could push this information out towards other systems if you would like. But it kind of provides a current state of my, I would say, flow of each of the flows. And what I would have in the end is that I could leverage that change feed in the Azure function. So I know that previous Cosmos DB user group sessions were around the change feed as well, because it's a pretty powerful feature, right? And you can listen into it also using a function. So the function could respond on any change, or every time the message enters this Cosmos DB, you can apply some logic on top of it if you would like. So you could say, okay, if an error occurs or something falls, is not correct according to some of our rules, then we kind of want to know or be notified about this. So there's a bit more of in-depth look of how we kind of start building up this solution. And now we'll zoom out again, looking holistically at information comes in, it will go through certain steps. It's being triggered by using this container. Blob comes in, it gets processed, the outcome gets pushed into another container, triggering another function, and this will just continue all the way up to deliver. And as you know, if you do this with a function, you could push some of this telemetry into, or at least that will happen if you have an application insights. But if it's more functional, and if you really want to know if the process has a hiccup somewhere, you kind of can push this information towards a topic or a queue. In this case, we're using a topic because we have two functions. One function pushing it into a Cosmos DB, leveraging the change feed, providing an integration, ultimately what's called a system called Topdesk, an incident management system. And then based on the tag, and I will show that in a second, based on certain tags, it was pushed into certain action groups. Something similar that you would also have in Azure when you're doing some of the notifications. You can also apply an action group. This would, again, target the right amount of incident information to the right person that can resolve it. So, and that, again, you have some efficiency here. What you see in this drawing as well, that's the same information is also being pushed in a log analytics workspace, where some of the data can be integrated or pushed towards a Power BI. So this could give another user or the business, or you can generate some reporting around how the information flow between all these systems is performing in general, and so forth. And it's also separation of concerns. So the Cosmos DB is intended to do the notification, etc., similar to the previous use case, while the logic of the a little bit lost for words here. The logging as workspace is more intended to get an aggregation of all the logging data, because it's kind of a log aggregating capability inside Azure, and then you can punch into or integrate it into with Power BI. There's also ways of using Synapse, I believe, with Cosmos DB doing something similar, but we kind of segregate it as like, okay, the Cosmos DB is kind of our event source, and this will give us our targeted notifications to whoever needs to follow up and resolve that incident. Similarly, they were also interested in some of their PowerShell scripts runs. So they had a lot of PowerShell scripts as well in this particular company that was moving data from A to B, or data that came from Azure all the way through a store sync mechanism or on-premise data gateway, some networking components where the message comes from, or the information comes from Azure, that will be pushed toward file shares on-prem and then being pushed through tunneling or other mechanism towards the end customer, or some of the systems that are not modernized enough that you can approach them for the outside or require other types of transportation. And they kind of want to have some insights as well, consolidated in Azure, seeing, is the information going correctly? Are these particular PowerShell scripts running correctly? Or, can we see that the data is going from A to B? Because it's pretty critical for them as well. So what we kind of did, we wrapped those PowerShell scripts. We didn't touch them at all. The result of those PowerShell scripts was being pushed to a file watcher, or at least a file system, which had this Windows service pushing that information to a queue, and then there was another function listening to it, which would push that information into a container, Cosmos DB, integration again, at least leveraging your change feeds, and then integration again with your top desk, and then another person responsible for this part of their IT has a look-see into what, is it really performing well and is it working or not? And how do these particular records look like? So the first one is this particular PowerShell one. It has an identifier as well, allowing to the person that's responsible saying, okay, so this is the particular scripting. So all the scripts were being labeled accordingly. And this showed, okay, this went fine. But let's say if the exit result would be 1 and there would be errors and everything, that this would result in the function creating a ticket or pushing that in all that information from this particular record all the way up to top desk. The other particular record that you see here is one of the stages again. So this is the mapping into intermediate. Usually in the integration, you want to kind of completely doing things loosely coupled from different systems so they're unaware of each other. So this you can be doing with queuing and such. But also on the data level, you can do this by providing, you can use something what's called an intermediate. So you would map to an intermediate and from the intermediate to what the target system wants. And this is the particular step with the information. So all the information has a tag and a certain stage. So this means that all the way up to top desk, everything is being segregated by domain, but also by tag. So they know particularly that this particular flow is failing on this particular way, and then you can dive into it. What actually is the error? At least some of the error information is also listed in the particular records. Again, allowing them to quickly see, okay, this is what goes wrong. Usually, what I see a lot of the integration solutions that are built, that there's some monitoring in place, but not enough. And back from the BizTalk days, I know that sometimes if the monitoring is not set up correctly, then you really have to use the BizTalk admin console, do tons of queries, and it takes consumes a lot of time to actually pinpoint where the error actually takes place. Building a solution like this, I feel, gives you a better insights into where the message actually happened pretty quickly, so you can act pretty quickly as well. And I think that's a huge benefit. So a result, I was still working on this. We're finalizing a lot of the flows, is that it allows them to quickly identify if it's a functional or technical error based on the integration top desk that has all the capabilities inside of it to allow to send or notify the people who need to be notified. So that's the strength of this particular incident management system. Building up this solution will give you insight of all your data flows as well, whether these are data flows inside Azure going from these particular systems supporting all kinds of processes for them, as well as everything that comes in through APIs. So there are certain APIs allowing to allow certain parties to deliver data towards, but then in a secure manner with an API hosted and API management. So we have some functional detection or at least ingestion of some information there as well, which is showed in that picture, as well as on-prem currently some of the data flows using PowerShell scripts. And in the end of the day, it provides a low-cost monitoring solution. The cost management is an important part in general. It's a best practice from Microsoft that also resides in the well-architected framework. You always have to look at certain costs, depending also on the added value that you provide. This solution using Cosmos DB serverless is a pretty low-cost solution for them, also given the workloads. So I kind of want to round off, or at least end kind of a session and giving some of the key takeaways. A little bit of a repeat. I think, at least what my learnings are, I'm curious of what you would think, but that Cosmos DB could be a valuable asset in a custom end-to-end monitoring solution. I know for integration there are solutions available in the market. I believe Kovi has a Service 360, there's a Nodonite, there's some other providers that could say, okay, but hey, we have these capabilities as well, but it's not tailor-made. It can provide, or it can fill in some of your requirements. It depends on the requirements that you have for your integration solution. Holistically, if you look at all your moving parts and the message of what you kind of want to see. And it also depends on the price. And again, this is a buy versus build type of decision that you can make. I would strongly suggest that if you're using Cosmos DB in certain scenarios, that I think that the change feed feature can then be of tremendous value. And I think I pointed it out also in this session that the change feed can be a valuable capability inside Cosmos DB that you can leverage. What I've seen in the couple of years since I started using Cosmos DB, that's evolved. In the beginning, you had to really look at some of the RUs. Back in the day, collection, you had collections, now it's containers. So there's some changes. There's integration with some of the other components. From the initial start, there was integration with search, which I find tremendous helpful as well. There's some data analytics and AI integrations available, I think also with Power BI and so forth. So it's a lot of evolution. I'm just still using some of the capabilities that were available from the initial part. Hosting is put on in service tier currently. The integration with what Microsoft has done and what the product team has done is, this integration with the other Azure components are really seamless. It's really useful. So I would definitely say kudos to the team building up the service. I know there was a long journey before it actually became GA and going forward by keep evolving it, but it's definitely, I would say it's a valuable service, and that's what I kind of wanted to point out in this session. Maybe a bit less technical, but more like, okay, what could be the benefit and how can you benefit from this particular service in a use case, like having it as a monitoring solution for your Azure integration services. Okay, and then I kind of want to thank you for attending my talk, and hope this can be useful and insightful for you. And I kind of want to give it back to you, Jay, and see if there are any questions I could answer.
So I actually have one question for you, and then we can kind of wrap up. I was curious if you found effective ways to analyze the monitoring data into reports. So let's say you want to present some sort of executive summary to someone about uptime, downtime, things like that. Have you found any really great tools to help you export that information?
So far, what we kind of leverage in that latter use case is that we're using the Log Analytics workspace, where we kind of push that data into the Power BI, and going from there. Unfortunately, we're not at that point yet to generate that type of reports, but it's something definitely that is required as well, what we're looking for. So it's still work in progress, I would say, on that end. We didn't use Cosmos DB in this case for it. So.
Gotcha. Well, I think one of the most important parts is being able to reflect on the information that you've gathered and be able to provide people with that kind of detail so that when did these big events happen, why did they happen, and how do we avoid, say, outages and things like that moving forward. So,
True.
I was just curious.
No, definitely the information, of course, is there based on when if there's events that has this error information in there, there's timestamps and all that stuff in there as well. So the information is there, so it definitely is useful to provide, or at least create those type of reports as well. We're currently at the stage where we already have a few things live, but we're also pushing this data monitoring solution going forward, including what you're stating about those reports. Those are things that need to be built as well in the near future.
Very cool. So do you want to talk a little bit about from a standpoint of monitoring, how alerting kind of fits into this whole kind of idea? Like, have you used some sort of native alerts like within Azure and Azure Monitor or something like that to be able to push notifications to people based on the data you've collected?
Not particular. I know I'm aware of that, those things are available, but for instance, in a Logic app, it can be pretty challenging and daunting to set that up, because it kind of aggregates. So if there's multiple errors, then you have to attach it to an action group, and sometimes you don't have the particular details. With regards to the functions, you kind of want to have these more functional details, or what kind of flow is it. If you set it up, you by general don't know what type of flow it is, so you have to provide that type of metadata, which you also want to push towards a top desk or other ways. The more technical, some of the stuff we're currently building will be using those notification mechanisms available in Azure itself and through Monitor. this is really geared more towards notifying some of the people that need to be notified with regards to functional errors. If certain orders, for instance, are not flowing through correctly, that would stall their business, that would impact the logistics, etc. So they kind of need to be aware pretty quickly. And that's what I think this monitoring solution provides for them.
Great, great. Hey, thank you so much. I want to give everybody a little bit of information before we wrap up.
Sure.
So if you want to find Steef-Jan on Twitter, you can go right to his Twitter account. It's there in his little box at the bottom, or you can take a look at right here. I got it. His blog also, you can get to it there. I'm going to go ahead and put the URL into the chat. Please check out his blog post. He's got lots of interesting information that he wants to share with you. And of course, if you'd like to see more of these types of sessions, you can head on over to the Azure Cosmos DB YouTube channel. We've got lots and lots of videos on getting started, our user group meetings, and all sorts of information, including what we just did recently, which was Azure Cosmos DB Conf. All the on-demand sessions, all the live sessions, they're all there. You could check them out. So we're just about at the end of it. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for giving me some of your time today. I know the community appreciates it. I know I appreciate it. And in closing, is there anything you'd like to plug of things that are going to go on in the future that you want people to check out or anything like that?
Well, definitely, of course, check out my blog, because I've created some stories in the early months. Then I had to prepare for the marathon, of course. So I'm coming back to blogging and also write a little bit about this stuff as well, which I presented, and some of the future learnings when this project itself will evolve. And the other thing is, I definitely would also reach out, or at least say to the community, also look at InfoQ. I know some of the related tech is being presented, are being written about and presented, and etc. as well. It's not just Azure, it's also other cloud platforms that can be interesting, but a lot of Azure is happening there. I occasionally write about Azure stuff as well. If it's this particular servers or other servers, so definitely have a look at InfoQ as well. And yeah, that's it. And you'll see my Twitter channel. So yeah, cool. And the other thing I'll do is hopefully go to some cool concert. There's one lined up for me on the 19th of May. That will be Tool, who will be playing in Amsterdam. So yeah, this will be my first big concert again, Jay. So in 2 years.
Very, very, very cool. I'm fairly lucky. I've been able to kind of keep myself active with different concerts over the last, months since we've actually had like a nice kind of, I guess, soft opening, if you will, here in New York City. We've got way more that we're able to do right now. So I want to say thank you again. I want to say thanks to all of our viewers who took part in today's session. And, if you've got questions, reach out to us on the Azure Cosmos DB Twitter. I think it's a great place to kind of send us messages. Keep your eyes open for new user groups. I'm going to try to get this done more than once a month. So I need your contributions, you, the viewer. So if you'd like to, just go ahead and send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. You can send it over here on Twitter at @jdestro. And that's pretty much really it. Steef-Jan, thank you so much for today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a good weekend for that matter.
Sure, I will celebrate the Liberation Day later on tonight. So that will be cool.
Very cool. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. I'll give you all the big wave goodbye. We will send out all the information on our next with Florian Eden. He'll be joining us. I think we're going to be talking a little bit about data and how he and I think he's got a co-presenter out. They're going to come together and give us a lot more information. So until then, take care, everybody. Be good to one another. Bye now.
Bye.